Tabootalk, first Tabootalk, very excited about this. I'm going to talk about the thing of addiction, and we're going to have 3 talks this day, actually 2 of mine. The taboo of non-abstinence, which is kind of a taboo sometimes in people trying to cure or help people with addictions. Could that be? Could you learn from non-abstinence? I'd like to talk about me first, the things that could be said about me professional, but maybe what I don't often say, nowadays more, but that I don't really often say, is my drug use over time. I did use almost everything during puberty and did use drugs over the years. I still do drink, but I do alcohol treatments. So, do you need to be abstinent? People don't think so. Let's have a look. Short thing I often get when I talk about integrative addiction coaching, there's always this problem. What if is integrative addiction coaching? There's theories that are integrated into each other. Perhaps not so interesting. More interesting maybe for the practical view is the way you're directed towards time. So not only looking towards the past, not only in the here and now, and not only in the future, but trying to really do the 3 things all together. And also whether you're geared towards understanding or feeling or behavior, and it's actually also an integration of those. It's the things we do if we are integrative, we're busy with integration, not extirpation. You can perhaps imagine the people from psychology who started with the medical model in their minds, and at the time, at Freud's time, there were a lot of people trying to cut away the bad tissues, and that's actually how people thought of psychology as well. You should cut away the bad ways of thinking, and therefore you should cut away the addiction, which is actually quite impossible, but it's a thing that we are working on integration. Science and experience based. Important, I think, very shame and guilt free, because shame and guilt often lead to exactly use of dope, and it's also geared towards emotions and understanding emotions very much. Well, if we work with people with addiction, the question is time and time again, either to quit or not to quit, and also either whether do you quit or are you geared towards control? And the thing is, if you're asking that question to somebody who's not able to control all the time, that's rather unfair, probably. And that often is in the same question: should we quit or control? But you can't control, so there's only one option left. The enormous risk in this kind of thinking is the shame-biased adaptation. People adapt to your thinking. They adapt to, okay, I will stop and I will quit, but it's not an internal choice, and therefore it doesn't last. So that has a lot to do with the way our society looks at addiction and addicts. And there may be a way of looking at 3 taboos why we do hate addicts in our society. First, we think of ourselves as a unified mind. So, of course, and that's a moral failure then of these addicts, they don't do what they say. Well, I don't know how that's with you, but I will explain that later more clear. But I don't do what I say all the time. Sometimes I don't know what I feel. So it's important to have this, to lose this idea. And if you really have a look at what the unified mind is, it's from Buddhism. You got to be so high up before you have this unified mind that we all like to have. Rather as an overestimation of self. Furthermore, it's a disease. So the first idea is get a cure and get it over with, which is rather ridiculous because it's a chronic disease. And you don't say to people with asthma, get it over with. But we do say that to people with addiction. And that's kind of strange. I think that has to do with the taboo of chronic disease in our society as well. And then there's the umbrella term of addiction itself, which is such a vague term you hardly can really work with it. If you have a look at what addiction there is, who are getting addicted? Well, all kinds of people are getting addicted. Of course, that can have to do with problems they had in their life, or with all kinds of psychology or psychiatry problems. But basically, addiction is such a broad umbrella with this great inside and a rather black outside. And if you understand that this term is too vague, then I'd like to cut it up, and I hope you take that from me today. At least have a difference between the biological and the emotional psychology side of addiction. Bit of quick thingy into the old theories, the hedonic ideas. It's so nice, you just can't stop of it, which is rather strange. For instance, nicotine, how great does that feel? Tolerance, you must use all the time more and more to get the same effect, which is strange because that's not always happening, especially with, for instance, cocaine. It stops being really fun. But it feels necessary. So it's not just tolerance. Tolerance is a thing that exists within addiction, but it's not the same at all. Withdrawal symptoms. There are a lot of people thinking, well, it's so hard to quit. That's why I don't want to quit. Which is rather ridiculous, because if you remove the withdrawal symptoms by, for instance, sleep, medicine that induces sleep, and you get over your withdrawal, people fall back right away. And even more, relapse happens years after withdrawal. So that it would be just, withdrawal was so awful, I won't let that happen to me again. So it's funny that it's self-medication, also a reason for people, that it has to do with if you're somehow having problems, you want to feel good, you want to self-medicate, which can be true, but it's also a problem because sometimes there's relapse even while people are on medication, so it won't be just that. And what's relatively new is that our motivational circuitry is hijacked, and that's important to know that here, especially in the nucleus accumbens, this basic thingy of our brains where motivation is made, that's where there's a problem. And it's hijacked. I will feel that it's important. And it's in the oldest parts of my brain. If I look at my brain at the left, or the schematic to the right, at the archicortex, the oldest part of the brain, that's where it's at. And then evolution got further, and that you could say that's actually a way of looking at a person. Our evolution got further, and we got this emotional brain, which we share with, for instance, other mammals. Rather shortly, there's this neocortex where we think, and that's important if we want to work with people. And of course, these old terms are perhaps not that clear to people, and I like the ideas of Pete Fromm, who says you can compare the archicortex with a crocodile. Hungers, lusts, that's where really craving, the deep feelings are. Then you could compare it with a dog or horse, but let's say dog. And that's where the intuitions are and the emotions are. And that's where we emotionally live, where we feel. And then the upper part is what makes, it's the understanding that makes us understand things, that makes us human. Here we find the addiction in the crocodile part. And if you understand that, that helps us to understand what helps with people, what happens with people with an addiction. And it helps us also why we are all so foolish. I stepped on my glasses this afternoon because of stress. And it's logical, because when stress gets up, my ability to think gets down. But what also happens is that my automatic behavior gets up. Now this is an important point. What's there? If my automatic behavior is geared towards dope and my thinking capabilities are going down, it's quite clear what's happening there. And I'm not even that stressed. I could be way more stressed. And that's often a problem where people say, hey, I'm starting to feel urgency now. And on this small moment later, there's already the craving setting in, because this is the way our brain works. And if we understand that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if we understand that we have all these reasons not to use, but where does craving, where's craving? Craving is at the bottom part. And I often like to simplify this with surviving life or living together as a way of thinking. It's the hunger from addiction, we find that in the bottom. And what happens when this hunger strikes in a life? That's what's happening to a life. And that isn't because somebody is stupid or unintelligent, but it's because the hunger is bigger and therefore the other parts of life derange. It's a sensitivity that used to be slowly going up, but when addicted, it really, you're in red right away. And then there's also this question if you are either an addict or you're not. That's quite simple. You're an addict or you're not. And maybe you start to understand that with what I'm saying, that's a wrong thought. It's not true. It's how strong is your crocodile geared towards this dope. And if you understand that it's quite a different thing having this crocodile or that one, you understand it's not like a flip switch, it's like a dial. It's not on or off. You can have a 0 for addiction or you can have a 10 for addiction. Well, none of us here are having a 10 probably, well, surely. But I would say I have a 0. I would say I think I'm towards a 5 sometimes. And that's a thing to remember, that biologically there can be this urge which changes from person to person. Well, the good news in this is basically that this crocodile is very simple. A crocodile having hunger has 2 exits. If there is something to eat, it will go towards the food. But if there's nothing to eat, a crocodile is more quiet than a Zen master. And that's exactly what people in the AA, for instance, use. Even if hell comes up or heaven comes down or a little bit God, church-like, even if the most nasty feelings come up or all my future plans come down, today I won't use. And if you have that clarity, your crocodile is cool. I'm apparently not today. Thought I was getting something, but apparently. So that helps for people to give themselves the clarity, or if you're a partner from somebody with an addiction, to perhaps help your partner give that clarity. I will talk about that in the second half. But we're not just crocodiles. Actually, we are this dog part as well, this emotional part as well. And I think the psychoactive chemicals do have two reasons why people would want to use. And that's where I come. Biologically, I would call that addiction. But this I would call dependence, psychological dependence, emotional dependence. We all learn emo tricks to cope with each other. If I'm sad, I go towards you and I let my head hang down, and you will probably stroke me on the back, and I will feel better. If I'm angry, I will go towards you with the head up and breast out, and you will either retract and I will feel less angry, or you're bigger than me and I will start to feel frightened. So we have these emo tricks together, but you don't need emo tricks. You can do chemo tricks. And with the chemo tricks, you change the feelings really fast, and that's why they're actually, you could say, much simplified, there are two reasons to use for people. Which do you think could be the two main reasons, emotional reasons to use? Anger, sadness, grief. We have this feeling, and we don't need to feel this feeling. We can help it. Then we can get it out of the way. And what would the other one be? Excitement. I want to experience things. We often forget there's two reasons to discard feelings or to experience feelings. A lot of people do use dope or alcohol. Alcohol's a dope for me. To experience things, not to not feel things, but to experience things. And that could be kink, that could be spiritual interpretation, it could be all kinds of things people are searching for, and chemic way is the only way. Another thing that's often a problem is the right handle to a feeling. And this is a bit of a kind of went strange, but I meant to sign a suitcase, and the thing is, if this feeling of the feeling is the suitcase, how much suitcases like these can I carry? Not very much. Because what I need is a handle. If I have words for the right emotional label, there will be a big chance I will be able to carry actually a lot of... he's away, but... You did so. I'd be able to... yeah, well, it's just like life. But if I do have the right handle to the feelings, I can be way more able to relate to people about those feelings, and to relate to myself about these feelings, to handle them clearly. But you can imagine that if I muck up a lot with dope and feelings, or behavior and feelings, because it's not only dope we're addicted to, we can also be addicted to buying or sex or gambling or games. But if I muck up this feeling, that's often where we don't know how to handle our feelings. In this, I make it very simple. Sorry, very male-female simplicity. A lot of men, they don't have no sadness. That's for women. Give them a few drinks. A lot of girls, really nice. Give them a few drinks. Bitches. Sometimes the anger or the sadness needs to come out by drinking. And that's why people actually start to drink, because their feeling needs to come out. But it's also a problem if people don't know what their feeling is. Sometimes people, it's clearly they're having a panic attack, but they do think it's craving. So a lot of things we do within coaching is trying to map out feelings, trying to find out how do you feel what feeling, and where do you feel what feeling, and what can you do with different feelings in your life to make basically as much of a happy life as you can. But clearly get the right handle to the suitcase. Because if you're not, most likely you will lose the normal way of feeling with food, but also with dope. When you started, you were full, you had enough, and then you stopped, and that was clear. But if we start feeling like adding all kinds of difficult feelings to this, you get this binge purge cycle where you really don't wanna, but you do anyway. And that's where I often say, well, there's 3 reasons for drug use to understand that. It's the biological addiction and it's the emotional dependency. As said, to discard or to experience things. And if we want to do that, and if we want to treat that, we will have to be actively in an active acceptance for the biological part, because it doesn't go away. You will have to learn to live with that. But for the emotional part, you could find alternatives. And it's not just about not using, it's about doing things so you don't have to use. It's emotional acceptance of the experience and trying to find different ways to live them or to give them a place within your past. And that's quite another way. You can heal that. You can't heal this. But here you can do a lot of things. And I do think that addiction coaching is way more than not using. Because we're so geared toward the not using, we're so geared towards the repression of things. And I say always the effect of 50 years of war on drugs as we've seen it up to now, drugs have never been so present, so good, and so cheap as right now. So it doesn't work. It's a daily balance act. If you have this addiction, it's a daily balance act. You might have this hunger towards dope that you perhaps don't want to use, but you will feel you will want to use it. You can encounter that with willpower, but is willpower all that's possible? Is willpower strong enough? Often willpower isn't that strong, and we might have some discussion about that. I like to think about the heart as a hard power, and about things like hope and love for others that are there in your life. And there is, of course, also the animal part with the habit does what it's like to, what it always does. But a strange thing is, people are often not that afraid for the dangers of their own addiction. Where you could say that sometimes the unjustified absence of fear could be addiction. And people can actually learn that if they have a life that's worthwhile, it gets easier to be fearful of what could be killed in your life because of your own addiction. So, if you have a coach client or partner client or friend, remember there's different layers in communication. Remember that if you explain things, try to be understandable. I hope I am. Try to recognize and accept, acknowledge the feelings of the other one, and not what's happening often in addiction coaching. You shouldn't feel that. That's old way of thinking. You should very top down and shame ridden. And recognize and acknowledge the needs and hungers that might lead to drugs. Recognize perhaps the traumatic memories that can be gotten away by drugs. And as a take-home message for the first part, maybe recognize the hunger, give hope, and justified fear. And be very clear about responsibility. Because it's your fears, your trauma, your hungers. Now, the risk now could be that some of you who are having a biological addiction think, hey, oh, I understand this. Now I know. Oh, I can have it. And we would have perhaps by knowledge have killed the justified fear, which it would be a risk. So be careful with your choices if you are living abstinent right now. And another thing is, this is easy. Remember, 98% of people do have slip-ups. So don't expect this to be without slip-ups. If you like learn about this crocodile in Dutch. And I think this is a bit about the taboo of our society. We like to be perfect, and we like to have likes on Facebook, and therefore we tend to dislike other parts of ourselves.